Hi, I'm Richard Karn, and you may have seen me on TV talking about the world's #1 expandable garden hose. Well, the brand new Pocket Hose Copperhead with Pocket Pivot is here, and it's a total game changer. Old-fashioned hoses get kinks and creases at the spigot, but the Copperhead's Pocket Pivot swivels 360 degrees for full water flow and freedom to water with ease all around your home. When you're all done, this rust-proof anti-burst hose shrinks back down to pocket size for effortless handling and tidy storage. Plus, your super light and ultra-durable Pocket Hose Copperhead is backed with a 10-year warranty. What could be better than that? I'll tell you what, an exciting exclusive offer just for you.
For a limited time, you can get a free Pocket Pivot and their 10-pattern sprayer with the purchase of any size Copperhead hose. Just go to getcopperhead.com. That's getcopperhead.com for your 2 free gifts with purchase. Getcopperhead.com.
Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details.
Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
Saved by Frei! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rui Diaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nico Ladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
It's gone! There it's gone! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Nice work on your little yacht thing.
And Portland can't say shit!
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder at Heart wrote a commentary that we didn't take the Open Cup seriously.
This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest. Welcome back to another episode of Nos Arietes, part of the Sounder Heart Podcast Network, sponsored by Full Pull Wines, Hacks and Ferments, and our subscribers. We're recording on Wednesday, July 9th, 2025. I am your host, Jeremiah Shan. Joining me today is my co-host, Aaron Campo, and our producer, Lickett. The Sounders are coming off a 1-1 tie with the Columbus Crew, a match where the result was virtually rendered moot by the injury to Stefan Frei at the end. And we'll talk about that. But I do think that this game, now that we have a little bit of space from it, there was a lot actually in this game that is worth discussing. Aaron, what is the thing from this game that you felt like what was the big takeaway that you had from this game?
Oh gosh. I think if I'm gonna come up with one that wasn't, I guess, obvious and wasn't a hot take, it's that I think Brian Schmetzer is maybe a little bit better of an in-game tactical coach than he gets credit for. I think one of the things that was interesting about this game was you had these very distinct periods of control of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like it was, I think, on the aggregate, a very evenly played game. There really wasn't anything between the two teams. But I think when the Crew were in control of the game, it felt like the Sounders had never played together before. And vice versa, when the Sounders were in control of the game, the Crew had a decent amount of meaningless possession, but the Sounders were able to spring attacks really quickly and cause them problems and completely prevent them from creating any kind of chances. So you had these like really distinct periods of control of the game, and they were all the result of tactical adjustments by the coaches. And Nancy, to his credit, made equally good tactical changes to counter what the Sounders were doing. But I think everybody acknowledges that he's one of the best tactical coaches in MLS. So to see Brian Schmetzer match up with him, go toe to toe, make adjustments in game, change the shape pretty distinctly, change sort of the game plan from the outset, I thought was really interesting. It was just a really good game. I played at a high level, most of it. The last 20,
I want to say the first 78
minutes.
Let's say first 75 minutes was a very competitive, interesting game, and then the last 15 to 20 minutes was kind of slop.
Yeah, I think you identified the yellow card to Mohamed Farsi for time wasting as sort of the point at which the game kind of died off. It was very clearly because the Sounders had been pushing pretty aggressively for the whole second half. They'd been really in control of the game. And they had started to fade a little bit, and they brought on Jordan Morris, who was definitely bringing some energy about 10 minutes earlier. And at that point, I think the Crew said, all right, we're going to shut this thing down because we're, it's at risk of getting out of hand. And they did until the red card, and they thought maybe they had a chance to snatch something at the very end.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I rewatched this game on Monday, and, I think rewatching games it's interesting. Oftentimes your second impression is very different than your first, but it's in a game like this, I was entertained. I thought it was a really great game. I was actually surprised at how many people thought the game was uninteresting. And I just thought it felt like it wasn't as fast paced as some of the games recently have been. And I think a lot of that is frankly just as comes down to the turf plays so much slower in the afternoon sun than it does in the evening. It's just stickier. The players, you can just see the energy is getting sucked out of the players a lot more. And it was a warm summer afternoon day. And I think that showed up, but there was still a lot of dynamic play, a lot of back and forth. The first 10 to 12 minutes, the Sounders really came out strong, looked like the better team. And then the Crew sort of flipped it on them. They got that goal, and it, really up until the point the Sounders scored, I thought that they were doing a good job of controlling that match. And it was starting to get maybe not ugly, but I remember being very impressed at how well they move as a group. They do some really interesting stuff in terms of being able to get their center backs into the attack. Like, I think there are various points in this game where you would be really hard pressed to identify who the center backs even are. Because Swiderski will be up in the attack. Steven Moreira will be up. And it's not just in the attack where, you'll see Jackson Reagan in the box on a set piece or something like that, and he'll maybe get stuck up there and he'll get a recycled header or something. But this is like their center backs have possession in and around the box in a way that just does not look like a center back handling the ball, and it's very impressive to watch. But on the other token, I was very impressed with the way that the Sounders flipped that game and really, kind of starting with their goal, which was a really nice goal, although Mark Kastner pointed out something I thought that was a fair thing to identify. So the Sounders get possession on that goal through Obed Vargas essentially trying to make up for a bad pass that he had made, and he wins back the tackle. They pass it around a couple times, and it goes to Nuhu, who is on the near touchline. And he has Christian Roldan he has a sight on Christian Roldan in the middle of the park. And if he makes that pass, Christian has the ball, 25, 30 yards out from goal, and the Sounders are in business. And he ends up recycling it back. And to the Sounders' credit, they work it around and they score the goal, right? And they score a goal, really nicely done goal. But it took really a dynamic play from Kalani Kosarienzi to make that goal, because it's not for that touch that he makes that puts him into the space, that goal probably doesn't happen. But I thought it was a fair thing to point out. Mark pointed this out, that Nuhu really should make that pass to Christian. And then and I thought it sort of identifies one of the Sounders' weaknesses this year is that they do a great job of turning teams over in that part of the field in their, they do a great job of creating turnovers in their half, either directly from pressure or as a result of teams just kind of kicking it away. But what they don't do is then immediately turn that into attacking play. They oftentimes are more than happy to recycle the ball. And a couple times this, in the last couple of weeks, they've created goals from that sort of recycling. And that's not to say that recycling is bad, but I do think it speaks to, there's this blockage, I think. And Brian Schmetzer says our directive is always pass it forward if you can. You should always be looking toward goal. And I don't know what's getting lost, but it is an interesting thing that the Sounders keep doing this, where they create these turnovers, and then instead of pressing forward, like you would see the Philadelphia Union or the New York Red Bulls, and that's really the thing that differentiates the Sounders pressing from some of these more sort of aggressive pressing squads, is that they just aren't. It's like they're doing it to almost create. It's more of a defensive tactic. I guess this is maybe the way to explain it. It's more of a defensive tactic than it is a offensive tactic. And I think a lot of teams use the press sort of as an offensive tactic, but that's not how the Sounders have really been using it.
Yeah, I agree with the observation. I agree with your characterization of the utility of it, and it drives me completely up the wall. Like it drives me nuts to watch it, because you see them create these turnovers in dangerous areas and fall right back into that pattern of play of trying to score in possession. And the thing that makes it so much more frustrating is that you can kind of forgive that a little bit more when your team's primary playmaker is Nico Ladero, and you score your goals from open play and good ball movement. But the Sounders don't have those players. Like Albert Rosenak is extremely dangerous in transition. They've got wingers who like to run. They have really effective pressers pretty much everywhere on the pitch, and they seem allergic to creating those countering opportunities. And when they counter from defense, right? Like if they're countering off of a set piece, they are super dangerous and they know what to do and they're decisive with it. But it's almost like
they don't like a short field.
That. Yeah, it's very strange. It's a very
the
strange
red zone
phenomenon.
offense isn't very effective.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I think that's true. It's
I mean,
like a football team.
It is like it's like a team that would rather have possession 30 yards out than have a possession in the red zone, because they're just not. They want that space to run in. They want and it's almost like and their goal kind of came from they had a goal like this last week. They had a goal, or 2 weeks ago they had the goal this week, where it was almost like they were seeking to expand the field, draw the opponent out, which is, hey, that's not a horrible tactic. If you can draw teams out, that's good. And maybe maybe we're being too naive. Maybe we weren't giving the Sounders enough credit for sort of using the press against teams the way that they kind of did in these last two games. But and maybe it is also why they struggle to break down teams who don't want to press them, who won't be drawn out. But I do think they need to get it in there. They have to get it in the playbook. Like they have to start figuring out that if you get the ball 30 yards from goal, you don't want to move it back 70 yards from goal. You want to get it to 10 yards from goal. You need to like take advantage of a defense that's not set,
Yeah. I mean, because if you're not doing that, I don't really understand the point of pressing so high up the pitch and so aggressively, because like by the 65th, 70th minute, most games, your wingers seem exhausted from having to play at that level of intensity. Your forwards are being asked to press too. And it's just like, if you're not going to try to take advantage of those opportunities immediately, if you're not going to take advantage of those turnovers in the opposition third immediately, save your legs, just go back to bring that line of confrontation back. And maybe the idea is, well, it's easier to dispossess a center back than a midfielder. I don't know. Maybe that's the idea, but
maybe.
the crew center backs, not really.
No, they weren't. Yeah, exactly. The crew center backs are pretty ball secure.
The crew have this pattern of play. Sorry to interrupt, but that I find really interesting, and I love it when my teams do it, and I hate it when other teams do it. Which is their center backs will just get the ball in their third, and the press isn't coming, so they'll just sit there. They'll just put their foot on the ball and wait.
That was an interesting little chess match.
Yeah,
we saw that several times in this game.
It can be so effective to see when it's working, when it's doing what you want it to do. And I thought the Sounders did a pretty good job of being like, look, I'm going to press you just so we can get this going, but I'm not falling into your trap. But when it's effective, like when teams are falling into the trap, it's lethal. And they tried it a decent amount and kind of figured out, all right, we're not going to really have a lot of results with this today, and moved on. But I mean, that just takes guts to trust your center backs as much as they do with the ball. It's really interesting to watch.
Yeah, the crew do a lot. I mean, they just do a very effective job of like moving as a unit. they are the closest thing I think that MLS has to a team that wants to play kind of total football, or whatever like the silly term is. But it was neat to watch. But at the same time, the Sounders were, especially in the second half, were all over the Crew. I mean, the Sounders they didn't generate a ton of actual goal scoring chances, but they had a few. The best of which was Paul Rothrock's chance in the 52nd minute, and that was really a great ball from Albert Rusnak. He had a couple passes like that in this game where he just put a ball on an absolute, he just dished out a dime, I guess. I don't know what the right way to call this, but he was really effective, I thought. And he put Paul into space. Paul made a great touch, I thought. And his only mistake there was he tried to go sort of far post. I think he's got his body shape sort of wrong. To me, it looked like a chance he really should have gone near post with. But even after that, they didn't have a ton of shots. And in fact, that may have been their last shot until Alex Roldan's shot in stoppage time. But they were putting the Crew under a lot of pressure. They were sort of a pass away from getting a really dangerous opportunity. And it was good to see. I did a little video today about Paul Rothrock, and I wanted to talk about this a little bit more because I think he is sort of, this game I thought was really emblematic of what he is doing so well and why he is getting into the lineup on a consistent basis. And a lot of people have focused on a line that I don't know if was actually in the video, but it was in my write-up where I said he was the least talented of the five Sounders wingers. And I would actually assume that he would agree with that, frankly. I mean, the Sounders have some really talented wingers.
Right.
Let me just be clear who we're comparing him to here. We're comparing him to Ryan Kent, Pedro de la Vega, Jesus Ferreira, and Georgie Manungu, who I think have really obvious talents and skills and assets. And it's fair to point out that getting the most out of your talent is a talent in itself. My point was that is sort of the thing that Paul is best at, is that he is best at maximizing his talent. But that's also not to say he's just some tryhard. He has some real abilities, one of which is he's very effective at getting runs in behind. We saw that repeatedly against the Crew. He's great at even recycling his run when he needs to, which is absolutely a skill. Like, he understands that just because you don't get the ball the first time, it doesn't mean 5 seconds later you can't try it again. He's good at, reading body language. He's in terms of like shaping his body. He has a lot of really good assets. And I thought he had a great game in this one. And I do hope people understand. I think he's actually a pretty good player, but I think we're also fooling ourselves if we think his ceiling is as high as these other wingers that they have.
Right. And a player's ceiling is not equivalent to what they're actually going to be, right? It's what they could potentially be if all of the environmental factors are right and they stay healthy, right, and blah, 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 blah. And I think that soccer is a game where you can be insanely talented and have a bad career because you're not good at other elements of the game. And I've never talked to Paul Rothrock. I don't know much about the guy personally, but I think that I don't think that you could make it as far as he has in his career without being aware of who you are as a player. Right. Yeah. And I think that everything he does on the pitch speaks to the fact that he is aware of what he is capable of and what he's not capable of. And one of the worst things that you can see is a soccer player who consistently tries to do things that they aren't capable of doing. It's like one of the ways guys flame out a lot of the time is because they are just convinced that they should be able to do XYZ thing that they just can't do at a high enough level. And I think Paul Rothrock knows exactly what he's capable of. And he's really good at the more cerebral parts of the game, like you mentioned. He plays the game, I think, in a way that really he brings something to the Sounders that none of the other wingers do. Like, he is able to create chaos in a way that nobody else can. he's a master of the dark arts. Like, he's one of the best shithousers that the Sounders have ever had.
Yes, he's got a lot of John Stockton in him. I realize John Stockton has become kind of a real third rail.
Right. We just mean on the
I'm just talking about on the pitch. He is kind of a John Stockton. I think he's probably a polar opposite from John Stockton off the pitch. But let's we're getting into it. I should have just kept that to myself. But
he's got some Gary Payton in him, right? Like,
there you go. Better.
He's
I think that's a good. That's actually a good comparison.
I think that it's something the Sounders have been missing. Like, I think that it's a mentality and mindset that I think the best Sounders teams, they've had a guy or two who was capable of doing that stuff, who was capable of selling fouls, who was capable of getting under opposition players' skin. The Sounders haven't had a guy that can bait people into reactions the way a couple of Sounders players that are currently on the team are maybe guilty of having happen to them sometimes. They do have a guy that can do that. They have a guy who, there's value in a player saying, I know I'm not getting to that ball and I am going to save my energy. I don't have any problem with players doing that. I think there is value in also having at least one guy on your team who said, I think I can get to that ball. Let's find out. Let's find out if I can get to that ball. And if I can't, I'm going to make your life hell while I'm trying to get to it. That's not everything, right? And I think, like what I said last week, I think that sometimes people mistake. I like watching the way that guy plays with, I think that that's a better way to play or more effective. I don't remember exactly how I said, but and I think that that's what I mean, right? Is like, you can't have every player that plays with that mentality. It's a recipe for disaster. But having one guy who is fully committed to that mentality is hugely beneficial. And I just don't see, none of the other Sounders wingers really do have that mentality. And that's not a knock against them. It's just, it's what the Sounders need at this moment in time. And he's going to give it to you. Like, he's going to give you that mindset and that approach to the game every time out.
And that's not to say that he's just like some try hard, safe player. Like, frankly, he's not that safe of a player. He does turn the ball over a fair amount. His pass completion percentage is actually appallingly low for a player who doesn't attempt a ton of progressive passes, but he does stretch defenses. He does chase balls. He's pretty good in the box. I mean, he is actually really good in the box for the most part. Like, he's a good, he doesn't waste a lot of chances. He doesn't, we get frustrated when a player, you say you got to put that on frame. He does a really good job of like putting it on frame and giving himself a chance to succeed. Those are big assets. Does it mean that the 100th percentile version of him isn't less of a player than the 100th percentile player of Pedro de la Vega? I mean, I think Pedro de la, like, the reality is that Pedro de la Vega's ceiling is probably a player in the Argentina national team. The ceiling for Paul Rothrock is probably not. Maybe, who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm underestimating him, but I don't necessarily see him as a as a U.S. national team player. Although it would be interesting to see what he would do in camp. We, as a total aside, Matt Doyle and I had an interesting conversation earlier this week about Christian Roldan and Jackson Reagan both getting into the national team camp. I do think both of those guys have really good chances, by the way, because I just think
they should.
Yeah, we just saw what they could do against some of the best players in the world. Against PSG won Club World Cup today, right? Or did they just get to the final?
They got to the final. It's going to be them, and I think it's either Fluminense or Chelsea.
No,
right?
Chelsea. It's Chelsea. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Oh,
they're playing Chelsea. Now that I realize that. But anyway, it's very, I don't know. It's an interesting conundrum that the Sounders have right now. They have I don't think they've ever had this much talent on the wing, and it's, if Paul is the only one that's producing, he's going to absolutely keep playing. But the talent is not their issue out on the wing right now. They have players who I don't know, like Georgie Manungu can't get on the field right now. And he's he's a really fun player. I mean, we just saw he just played again for the Tacoma Defiance, and he had he's just so dangerous, and I can't really blame the Sounders for not getting him on the field more. But it would be interesting to see what he can do. I'm actually kind of looking forward to this little period of fixture congestion that's coming up, because hopefully we're going to see a little bit more rotation. Because right now Brian has essentially settled into basically his starting group. Like, the lineup has changed every week, but it's usually for suspension or an injury here or there. It seems like his core starting group, if my impression is that if everyone is healthy, you've got probably Jordan Morris starting up top, Paul Rothrock, and I guess Jesus Ferreira is the other winger right now, Albert Rusnak, Vargas, and Roldan, obviously. And then I still think Roldan is the starting right back. And then I assume Yamar is your starting right center back, Jackson Reagan on the left, and probably Nuhu and Fry. But I do think there's some interesting competition going on here. And I think this was it was like the emergence of Alex Roldan as a viable option at center back is absolutely fascinating to me, because what it does is it allows the Sounders to keep Jackson Reagan on the left, play Alex Roldan, he's made it look so easy these two games. I guess maybe we can talk about dig in on that, because the combination of Kalani Kosarienzi playing really well, his red card aside, and Alex Roldan looking really competent at right center back, that does give the Sounders some interesting options, I think.
It really does. I mean, I think I said last week that I'm fine with Alex getting more time at center back, but especially as it's necessary. But I wouldn't expect that to be like a long-term possibility, and I think I'm like as a permanent thing, and I think I'm still in that camp, but I'm less convinced than I was last week. Especially because I felt like the Crew were trying very hard to target him last week. Like against Austin, it was a little easier to write it off, because it's like, all right, you're playing Austin at home. He didn't have a whole lot to do, even though he looked pretty tidy. But against a good team like the Crew, who identified him as a potential weakness they wanted to attack to see him have the kind of performance he did, was, that's a little bit different. That's a little bit different that's some new information that you've got, right? So, I mean, I don't think he's a better center back than Yamar. I think when Yamar is healthy, he's like the second or third guy on the team sheet probably, but Yamar's got to, not going to be around forever. And if Kosarienzi keeps developing and you want him to get minutes, I'm not giving up the dream of the 3 center back setup, Jeremiah. I just won't let it go. And who
are your 3 center backs though? I think that's becoming an interesting question.
That's the thing, right? Like Nuhu was always one of the obvious choices, and now I think, if you've got everybody healthy and available, maybe it's Reagan and Yamar and Alex. Right. Maybe that's who you go with, and maybe
more realistically, maybe Yamar I do wonder how effective Yamar would be as a left center back. I do think that's a legitimate
and Reagan, I guess, needs to play in the center.
Right, exactly. Right. So I do think that's one problem with that. But I'm also I am really intrigued by what happens here with the defense, because I think suddenly at full strength the Sounders have some really interesting and somewhat interchangeable options, because you've got Kalani Kosarienzi, obviously, you've got Alex Roldan, and if Alex Roldan can slide back, that allows you to get Kosarienzi onto the field a little bit more, and then you've got Reagan in the middle. I think Reagan is easily your best kind of distribution focused center back. Although I do wonder now if Alex can really play center back, maybe if Jackson's not available, maybe Alex Roldan can deputize there. That's kind of an interesting wrinkle to this whole thing.
You usually think of Sorry to interrupt, but just on that point, you usually think of a 3 center back setup like you want your top stopper type defender in that central position.
But that's not how the Sounders use it.
Well, I've definitely seen center back setups where the central center back is sort of a more advanced player, right? And they really are more of a pure distributor. You potentially take some of Jackson Reagan's distribution abilities off the table if you play it that way. But I don't think that Alex being like maybe a little undersized for an MLS center back is a problem if you're playing him in that kind of a role in the center.
Yeah, especially if you could put, let's just say hypothetically, you want John Bell and to me, if I'm out there making the decisions and I have to choose between playing John Bell in the role of Jackson Reagan, which is the Sounders have done a bunch of times, I would rather play a 3 center back set with one of Nuhu or John Bell on the left, Alex in the middle, and Yamar or Kim on the right. If they were posed with that sort of situation again, I would find that to be intriguing. I mean, I guess Kim also played on the left quite a bit while Jackson was out, so we shouldn't discount that as an option as well. But it does give. I just think it's really interesting. The Sounders have a lot of optionality, and it's just going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. Because I don't know that they've had a lot of players who have just failed the test that they've been given this year. You know, there've been games where they didn't look great, but they've also, those same players in similar situations have also looked very good. So I think there's a lot of interesting options back there. I think the Sounders probably the biggest question right now is what happens if Christian or Obed are out for an extended period, because that is probably my biggest concern at this point. Luckily, we haven't had that tested, but João Paulo being out does not help. I suppose Alex can potentially deputize in the central midfield. That's probably going to be something that, we're going to see at some point. So I don't know. I'm fascinated by these various options that the Sounders have.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's funny to be talking about all of these options while we're still in a situation where we're forced to play Alex Roldan at center back because everybody else is dead. But
right.
But it's true. And players are getting healthier. So it is nice to think about. Like, it's almost a coping mechanism of like, well, once these guys are back, we've got a lot of.
Well, the thing is that Yamar and Kim are back in full training. So I don't know that either one of them I don't think either one of them are going to start against Sporting Kansas City, but they're going to be again, we've said this. I feel like we've said this many times throughout the year is, once we're fully healthy, we're going to have all these options. And then invariably there's some big injury, but, I guess right now Steph Frei is out and João Paulo is out. And, so it's not like they're totally healthy, but it is. I do think it is a deep team. It really is a deep team. I know people apparently hate talking about that, but
yeah,
there's interesting options.
I think we've said some variety of this a lot over the past month or so, but being a deep team doesn't mean you can endure a bunch of injuries without a hitch. It means you can endure a bunch of injuries without dropping to the bottom of the table like a stone. Yeah, right. Like, one of the themes I think of the last couple of years has been, okay, the Sounders are back to full strength. Are they gonna has their confidence been destroyed? Are they gonna be able to rally and make a charge this late in the game? And they've been up to it, but it's really nice to be getting back to full strength, coming into the I guess not the stretch run yet. That's
but
after
coming
Leagues
into
Cup,
the meat of the. This is we're really getting to the meat of the season here. They've got about 14 games left to play in the regular season. They've got Leagues Cup's going to start at the end of the month.
Yeah,
the schedule is going to get more congested.
Right.
We had a stretch of season where it was not congested. We had about 2 or 3 months where from the end of Champions League until now, where they were just basically playing a game a week. That's over.
Yeah. And as it stands, they're 9 points out of first place with a game in hand on first place. That's a much better situation, than they've been in the past couple of years. So it's hopefully, though, they can stay as healthy as they have down the stretch in the past couple of years. because they've endured all these injuries at the start and in the middle of the season and stayed relatively healthy after that. And hopefully, that pattern holds true, but they've been able to endure it a lot better this year, I think, than they have in years past.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we're going to this is probably a good place to take a break. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Stefan Frei situation, the Andrew Thomas situation. And you're listening to Nos Audietes.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes Nos Audietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
Nos Audietes, admittedly, is not exactly known for our spicy takes, but that doesn't mean we want our food to be mild. Spice up your life with Hacks and Ferments. Handcrafted in Georgetown and made with the best local ingredients from across the Pacific Northwest, they specialize in unique small batch fermented hot sauces and vinegars. Hacks and Ferments brings bold flavors and natural fermentation together for something truly special. Whether you're a heat seeker or just looking to elevate your cooking, you'll find something you love at hacksandferments.com. That's HAXANFERMENTS.com. And right now, if you use the code SOUNDERATHEART, that's all one word, at checkout, you will get a free hot sauce with your order. Again, go to hacksandferments.com, use the code SOUNDERATHEART at checkout for a free hot sauce with your order. Hacks and Ferments is a proud sponsor of the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network. Welcome back to Nos Audietes. So we do have a power ranking segment. We're going to power rank the way we want to see the Sounders use the U22. But before that, we probably should talk about the Stefan Frei injury, because it was sort of the dominant narrative, the dominant storyline that came out of the game. It was scary. It was scary in a way that I don't know that I have experienced in a stadium before. I wrote a column talking about how I've covered an unfortunate number of these, season-ending injury types of situations, including one to Steph when he broke his leg. Like these things are scary and they happen, but they've never, like, this one felt different. There was the fact that the ambulance was on the field, the fact that there was some concern of, like, is he even moving type of stuff. It was a scary looking collision. It is also at the same time really reassuring, and it's easier to sort of like move beyond it now because we know he's okay. He's walking, he's he's home. He was, essentially released from the hospital the same day, and he was back home. So it's his CT scan was negative, which means there was no other damage. So these are all good things. But at the same time, you do hope that he takes some time off. Even if he were cleared to return the next game, it's almost like, no, like, just take some time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think if for no other reason, then that's got to be a traumatic thing to go through. I mean, I think if you're a goalkeeper, you have experienced a lot of pretty tough collisions, and it's just part of the play in the position is you have to be brave to put yourself in those situations where you're pretty vulnerable. People complain a lot of the time, and by people I mean MLS color commentators, most of whom used to be forwards, about how protected goalkeepers are. But like that's why, right? Because they're
putting themselves in danger in a way that is
right. Is very real. And like I think that there was a little bit of recklessness shown from the crew player. Like, I don't necessarily need him going in like that, but like they're trying to win a game, and it was mostly just bad luck. Like, I think there's a good argument that that's a foul on him.
I definitely think there's a good argument there's a foul. But it's not, I don't think it's a dirty play or anything, but I think you can like, I feel like almost every time a goalkeeper gets hit like that, it's a, not even like that. Like, if you run into the goalkeeper, it's a foul almost always. Like, the more I think about it, I'm a little confused how it wasn't a foul. And honestly, I'm not trying to beat up on referee Ishmir Pekic too much. I didn't think the game was called great, whatever. I'm not going to, it was well within the range of what you expect, but it does boggle my mind that he was ready to let that corner be taken.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. It's pretty shocking.
Like the easy way out there was to say, "Oh, there was a foul. Let's end the game."
Right.
But or like it's a foul, and I guess maybe I'll make you kick the ball or something. I don't know what you do there, but it's just like I actually had a conversation with Pro about this because I wanted to get a comment from them about that decision and whether or not they would like to see the game whistled dead at that point. And without getting into too many details about how this conversation went, they wanted to clarify that under normal circumstances, the referee does not have the authority to just call the game. Like, that's just not how the MLS rules work. That if this were to happen in the 85th minute, just to pick a random point in the game, and even if there was a horrible injury, for the game to be called, that would be a decision that would have to come down from the league office. Yeah. Even if it's like, if you've awarded 7 minutes of stoppage time and it happens in the first minute of stoppage time, that's still like a different situation. And what I was really trying to understand, though, is like, well, that wasn't what happened here. We know what happened here. What happened here was that there was about 8 seconds left on the referee's watch. The 7 minutes that he had originally awarded had already expired. What is shouldn't common sense sort of take over here? And there was sort of like a reluctance on Pro to commit to what they really think should happen there. And I think my suspicion is that it's because everyone kind of gets it. Like, yeah, it's probably should call that game, but
yeah,
they also don't want to like throw the referee under the bus, I suppose. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this all comes out, because I don't know if Pro is going to actually put out a statement about this.
No. And I mean, at the end of the day, the game was ended. There shouldn't have been as much drama over it, I guess. But like, ultimately, I don't know what would be different. I think once it was very obvious that Steph was very seriously hurt, because there are lots of scary collisions in soccer where a player is down for a few minutes and they end up being okay. Although, I mean, Steph did have the fencing reaction, and it was pretty obvious pretty quickly that this was not one of those situations. But that was for everyone that had the benefit of replay and everything like that. Like, if you're a player or the referee and you didn't see it that closely, I think once it became obvious that there was a serious injury or the potential for a serious injury, calling the game was the right call. And ultimately, that's what ended up happening.
And I guess that's maybe one of the other things, that we ultimately did get to the right place.
We got the right result. Yeah.
It's just that I think it didn't feel like it got there the right way.
It should have taken less pleading from the coach of the team who stood to benefit the most from the corner being taken. Like, Nancy looked legitimately bewildered that the referee was not calling
that there was even a possibility.
Yeah. And like, he had to convince him almost to do it. And I think that speaks to it. But, I was not enamored with the refereeing performance either. So there's part of me that doesn't want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but it's also just a shitty situation to be in as a referee, I think, too. It's a bad situation for everybody. And yeah, I'm so glad that Steph is okay. Like, this was one of the relatively okay. This is one of the times where the Discord being ahead of the game, I was grateful for it. It's usually really annoying because people cannot help but react immediately to things that they're watching live that they know other people aren't.
Yeah.
But in this case, I was glad because I was able to go to the other room before I had to see it and was able to know that stuff was mostly okay before I saw the collision. And so that was good. But yeah, it's one of those things, man, when one of the things you do for entertainment has this element of risk for it, it's very easy to just sort of push that out of your mind most of the time. And when you confront it, it's a really uncomfortable feeling. To recognize like, yeah, that like these guys can get seriously hurt any game, any time out. And it makes you really grateful for them doing it. Like especially in a league like MLS where like Steph is handsomely compensated, but he's not making I never have to worry about anything for the rest of my life money, I don't think.
No.
And so for people to put themselves on the line like that, like it really, to me at least, it makes me just really appreciate them that much more because it's a dangerous way to make a living.
Yeah, and Obed Vargas, I thought, had an interesting line about that and sort of said, like, look, we all know inherently that when we do this, that there is a chance that we could get very seriously hurt, and we do it anyway, and that's sort of what the job is. And it was an interesting, it's one, I guess that's a 19-year-old maybe talking, but I just thought it was an interesting insight, and it's a fascinating like I'm not going anywhere with this. I just think it's a reminder that the players sort of have to have that mindset of like, look, I'm either doing this all in or I'm not doing it at all. And, it'll be, and I just hope Steph gives himself the space to kind of make sure this is really, like I'm certainly not trying to get him to retire or anything like that. I just hope he feels like he can make a smart choice and he can do what he feels most comfortable with. And part of the reason I would hope that he doesn't feel like he needs to rush back is Andrew Thomas is capable goalkeeper. He hasn't have great numbers this year, but I don't necessarily I don't put that on him. I was a little surprised. I did some research for a story I ran today where I basically just compared their metrics, and they have a shockingly similar sort of spider chart of what they're good at. Like Frei is a little bit better of a shot stopper. He has a little bit better of a goal, goals against average, but not really that much. And really, the one thing that Thomas excels at is that he's better at claiming crosses. He's actually really, I didn't quite appreciate how good he is at claiming crosses. He ranks in the 99th percentile in terms of percentage of crosses claimed, which is, obviously a pretty good thing. But neither one of them leave the penalty area to do much. That was kind of an interesting little, like they're both very much toward the bottom of the league in terms of coming out of their box. But I do think the Sounders are in good hands, and I hope that gives Steph a little bit more space to make a smart choice and to, if he needs a few weeks off, whatever, I hope he takes it.
Yeah. And I'm glad also that the sport has gotten to a place where that's even an option. That's even considered being an option, because it really wasn't that long ago where, players were under a lot of pressure to come back from an injury like this, where they were outwardly physically capable of playing. So it's good both in the sense that the Sounders aren't going to suffer too much, but also that there's no or less pressure, I think, just for a player to shrug off an injury like this.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, this brings us. I don't really have a good transition, but we're gonna power rank our. We basically came up with 3 categories. So it's not the normal 5. We just got 3 categories. How we want to see the Sounders, how we think the Sounders would most effectively use their U22 spot. One of them is going all out and spending, $6 million or more on a U22 transfer. The other one is spending a more modest amount of money, probably somewhere in the $2 to $4 million range. And then the final category would be using it on a homegrown or internal signing. The Sounders, of course, have 3 open DP spots, so I suppose you could say I want to use one of each. But for the purposes of this discussion, I think we're going to stick ourselves, just rank these in priority. Aaron, what is the least of those 3 options? Which is the least intriguing to you, or the thing that you think would be the dumbest decision? Maybe is a better way of putting it.
Because they're different. Because I think this would actually be the most intriguing in a lot of ways, but I think it's the worst use of the mechanism, and that would be spending $6 to $8 million on a player who has potentially a super high upside, but is a project, a longer term project. I think that you can hit on those players, but it is exceedingly rare in MLS. It is rare to find a player who's going to live up to that potential, who is the right like Venn diagram of hasn't reached a high enough potential that they're not available to an MLS club at such a young age, but still has a high enough potential that they are worth spending that much money on as an MLS team, but also doesn't demand a wage that makes them a non-starter as a U22 player. That's a very narrow slice of players. And so anytime you spend, a transfer fee on a young player, you're rolling the dice, as I think we've seen with Pedro de la Vega, who is a less risky player than any of these guys would be. So yeah, I think that if you didn't have an academy that was regularly turning out MLS quality players, if you didn't have such a good track record of drafting and then developing decent players with the Defiance, maybe that's a good way to go. But because the Sounders are really good at developing younger players, I just don't think it makes a lot. And they're cheap, right? Like if the Sounders were freewheeling and willing to spend $20 million on designated player signings and there wasn't a concern with spending on the first team, then sure, go for it. Like make that your spin of the roulette wheel. But because they are pretty cheap when it comes to transfer fee spending, it's the thing I'd like to see them do the least, because if it fails, they will never spend another dime.
And I think that that's the thing right there that pushes me to agree with you, is that it would be different if the Sounders were a team willing to spend to make bad investments. If they were Inter Miami, who has made a bunch of big signings who haven't all with the U22 initiative, and they haven't all worked out. But the thing is that if one goes bad, they know they can move that player along and get a new one. LAFC, kind of similar, where they know that they have the infrastructure built in saying, look, we're going to take a lot of, this is a volume game in part. The Sounders do not play a volume game. The Sounders they almost need, every investment they make almost has to hit for this to work. And that is part of why the Pedro de la Vega thing has been so frustrating, is that it's not that he's such a bad investment. It's that he was kind of, the way it's being framed is it was like, this was their one shot and it's not hitting. And so now that's making them more gun shy to do it again. And look, if you're going to invest in young players, you have to be willing to take losses. That's just the game. That's how it works. There's a saying in baseball, there's no such thing as a pitching prospect. And I think that's probably true about everything. It's not, you don't have a pitching prospect. You have pitching prospects. You have 5 guys that you think could be a number one starter. If one of them hits, that's great. But you can't have one that you think is going to be the next Roger Clemens or whoever, whatever players are these days. I don't know any pitchers anymore. But
right.
The point being is that you can't just put all your eggs in one basket. And if you're going to play this game, you got to be willing to take losses. And I don't think that's where the Sounders are right now. So I agree with you. I think that for the Sounders, making a big investment in the U22 is probably not a prudent choice unless they're changing the way that they do business. So what's your number 2 spot? What's the second most thing you would?
So for me, this is number 2 in a vacuum, right? And when we get to number 1, I'll come back to why this is number 1 in this situation. But of all the, possible things the Sounders could do with these spots, this is not with a blank slate. This is number 2, and that is signing a player of the caliber of Noah Ohio, who is, I think, has a little, a higher floor probably than the more expensive younger players, but also a much lower ceiling than those players. I think that if you can sign a player who costs about what he would cost and it has a salary about what his salary would be, and you can get in aggregate Leo Chu levels of production out of him, I think that's a pretty decent investment. Hopefully that would be a little less weighted towards like one 20 game chunk of time and more spread out over the time he was on the team. But, if you can get that sort of return on your investment, I think that's a pretty decent outcome. And I think there's a very good chance that a player like that could be a much better player who could go on to be a really, really good striker in MLS. And I think the odds that they just aren't useful at all are very low. Like, I think he slides in right now probably below Musovski on the depth chart, but I think with a pretty good shot of beating Musovski out for that, backup striker role in the near future, or making you feel more comfortable getting some return on your investment in Danny Musovski, who's had a great season and probably looks pretty attractive to some MLS teams who could use a starting forward. It gives you more options. So that is, I think, the second best use, because you're probably not going to get a world beater. You're probably not going to get a player you can turn a huge profit on, but you're probably going to get somebody who is at least worth the roster spot.
Well, let me ask you this, because I feel like the people's excitement or lack of excitement around Ohio are mainly two buckets. On one hand, people see a player who has moved around a lot. He's played for 7 different organizations. He's only 22. So he's averaging like basically an organization per year since turning pro. He's been productive on a per minute basis, but he's never really established himself as a starter.
Yeah.
And then there's other people that say like, well, he's moved around a lot, but that also shows that he's been able to be successful in a variety of different places. He's scored a bunch of goals at the youth national team level, and he has scored, when given the opportunity, he scored a lot. So if we can, especially if you consider he might not play a lot, this is the kind of player who probably fits in nicely. So I guess given those two sides, which one are you more inclined to be sympathetic to?
I don't think that either side of that argument is wrong. I think that everything you said is true. But I think I am more inclined towards the latter, I guess more optimistic, you would say, take, in that I think this is just a really common career path for people who have this sort of elite youth career trajectory, right? Where, they go from their local academy to Manchester United to Manchester City, which at that time was a step down from United, to Red Bull Leipzig. And then, okay, he's probably not going to make it here, but let's loan him out and see if he develops, or we can get some money for him. And they do pretty well. Like, he did pretty well on loan, but never good enough for teams to be like, yeah, we feel like we need to bring this guy in. And so he's just kind of trying to find his level. And then he goes to Standard Liège, which I think is a pretty good comparison for the level that you would hope for in MLS. And he was pretty good, but it's understandable why they would maybe want to move him on. They have a pretty high standard. And now he's at Utrecht, and he's had success there in limited minutes. But I can also see why they'd be like, hey, if somebody wants to pay us a couple $1 million for this kid, like, he's probably never going to be a superstar in the Eredivisie. We're happy to do that, right? So to me, it's not necessary. It is notable that he's moved around that much, and it's notable that he hasn't stuck at any one place. But there are also a lot of guys who are good MLS players or good players at, a similar level to MLS who have that kind of career path, who move around a lot as young players, especially when they start out at like a very high level, because teams say, oh, he's a Manchester United Academy product, or he was in Manchester City's Academy for 3 years. Like, let's take a shot at this guy and see what he's got. And he's not at that level, pretty obviously. So, yeah. So that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. I'm more like, I like this signing. I think this is probably about as good of a use of, like, I also want to say that I've seen him compared to Leo Chu a lot. And I do think it's important to note that his track record, his stat sheet is way, like, Leo Chu was way more indexing on look what he could be in his potential. Right. Like, he had not produced anything like what Noah Ohio has. So, and I suspect Noah Ohio is going to if the Sounders get him, they're going to have to spend more money than they spent on Chu, I suspect. He's older also, but anyway. So number one for you then is you would really like to see the Sounders make a internal signing, whether it be someone else from in the league, basically is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that the best use of this roster mechanism in a vacuum again is for academy prospects and domestic players who meet the criteria of a U22, who are productive MLS players already. Josh Atencio, Obed Vargas, guys like that. Those are players who are going to do well in MLS because you've already seen it. There's already a proof of concept there. You're getting that cap relief. You're getting that extra cap space. There's zero risk to it, or less risk. Like if you're trading for a guy in league and you're giving up a decent, like Colorado took a pretty big risk trading for Atencio, but it's not the same as the risk you're taking by spending an equivalent amount of real American dollars for a player who may completely flame out, right? So there are lots of pluses. The minuses, like you're not bringing in a new person with upside. You're just managing your books. But I mean, it's not sexy. It's not exciting, but accounting is a big part of being a really good MLS team. Knowing how to manage your books is a huge part of success in this league. So, it is a really effective use of the roster mechanism. Having said all that, though, I think the Sounders are in a situation where they need to spend some money. I would like them to make Obed Vargas a U22 player because it seems like he's probably not going to get sold this season. And frankly, I don't really want them to sell him this season because I don't see what they're going to spend the money on. They can't sign a DP right now. I don't think that they're going to be making the space to sign a DP before next season. They would have to replace Obed, and they're going to be that's a lot easier to do in the off season. So I'm happy to have him, still on the team through the rest of the year at the very least, at a, on a contract that makes the rest of the roster management a little bit easier. But I think they need to spend some money. I think if they have a player that they think can help, spending some money would go a long way towards getting a little bit of, showing a little bit of good faith to the fan base.
Yeah. And I do think that's in some ways the most important element of this is that on one hand, they have a deep roster. And so it's by definition going to be hard to find someone who upgrades the roster. And I do think that Weibel has done maybe not himself a disservice, but I do think he's maybe not framed this as well as it could have been framed, because he's sort of given this idea that the Sounders are going to go out and find a starter. I don't think there is a realistic scenario where they're going to find a starter with the U22 spot. That's just not going to happen. Now, could that player become a starter? I think that's more his point, is that this player could theoretically become a starter. And I just don't. And so I suppose Noah Ohio could do that. He seems like on paper, he seems a very similar player to Jordan Morris. But I agree with you that probably the best I think the best use of this mechanism that we've seen, like the Jack McGlynn trade, whatever we call that, cash for, I guess it's been called, it has probably been the best U22 signing this year. I haven't done a real big dig into that, but like that seems like a really good move, and it's the kind of move that I think shows a lot of promise. So I don't know. It'll be. I mean, if they could only do one of those things this offseason, I think that's the kind of move I'd like them to make. But fortunately, they can do both of those things, and I think they should. Yeah, and I do think Obed. The other bit of news we had this week, Obed Vargas looks like he has had his option exercised, which is not huge news in itself. I think everyone knew that was what was going to happen. The bigger news is that the Sounders are trying to get him signed to a 2-year extension. My understanding is how that would work is he would have 2 additional years. It would probably technically be a 3-year contract, because if he were to sign it now, I'm pretty sure it would replace next year's contract. And I would imagine his agents are probably going to push for close to the maximum that they can get, which is about $1 million.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about paying Obed Vargas $1 million right away, but I say more power to you if you can get that. Especially, but I think it's hard to say. It's also hard to tell a player, look, we think we can move you for 10 million, but we won't pay you 1 million. That does come off as a little tough to sell.
Especially because he could say, all right, you don't want to pay me $1 million, then take the Tigres offer and get me out of here. And I'm not suiting up until you do that. Like, he has that leverage, and he does.
I don't think that's what he's going to do, but you're right. He does.
No.
It could go that way, I suppose.
Right. And also, this is a situation where the Sounders have to care how much Obed's paid as a U22, but I don't care, because it doesn't affect anything I care about. Right. Like,
right.
Doesn't hit the cap. So not my money. And it's not enough money that I could see it meaningfully. Like, they're not going to not buy a DP the next time they have an opening because they paid Obed Vargas $250,000 a year more than he. Well, no, you know what? That's a good point, Jeremiah. You would hope not. You definitely would.
Right. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, I think that's probably a good place to end this. Thank you, of course, to our sponsors, Full Pool Wines and Hacks and Ferments. Thank you to our listeners and our readers. I will, of course, give another pitch that if you listen to the show and you think it's valuable what we're doing at Sounder at Heart in a larger sense, please become a paid subscriber. Plans start as low as $30. They go up to $75, and then even more than that if you really want to get crazy. And this is we're getting into sort of pledge time, as it were. August is when everything sort of resets. We have the biggest bulk of our subscribers signed up in August. So at the very least, I would hope that if you are a subscriber, that you are planning to renew. And if you feel like you want to get crazy and you want to change your membership and pay us more money, that would be great too. There's probably ways to upgrade your membership if you want to do that. But I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna sign off for Aaron Campo and Lickett. I am Jeremiah Oshan. This is Nos Audietis, part of the Sounder Heart Podcast Network. And remember, you'll never get alone.
I expect a LAFC who's motivated to prove themselves at home, to prove to their fans that they're capable of winning in this league. And it's up to us to really brew in the party.
I feel a lot better than Bob.